What's up, pod pals? It's your buddy Adam, and you are listening to Let's Talk About Your Podcast, the podcast where we dive into the podcasting journey of all my pod pals out there. I've got my new pod pal, Trace Blackmore from Scaling Up H2O, a very niched down podcast. I know there's a lot of you that fear that niching down process. We're going to dive into that for sure. We're going to see what's gone well, maybe what hasn't gone so well, and where his goals are for his show this year. Trace, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, Adam. I'm very excited to be a guest.
Well, I love, my listeners know I'm just all in on the niching down your podcast, like having it dialed in as specific as possible. And I feel like having a podcast called Scaling Up H2O, I like where this is going already. So we'll definitely get into that, but let's maybe talk about the beginnings of your podcasting journey. What initially made you go like, all right, I got to do this podcasting thing?
Well, I don't know if I ever had that epiphany. Somebody gave it to me. And I've been a member of a mastermind group for about 12 years now. One of the members of my mastermind group, I don't know, back 2016, 15, somewhere around that time, said, Trace, you do a great job of explaining things. Your voice is all right. So what do you think about doing a podcast? And I said, well, Charlie, that's very complimentary. Now, what's this podcast you speak of? I had no idea what a podcast was. And he laughed at me. So we downloaded, I have an Android, he has an Apple. That's an ongoing battle. So I handed him my Android. He put gloves on because he couldn't touch
friends? I don't know.
It's very difficult. We have counseling that we go to. But he, the first podcast app that he downloaded, I believe, was Stitcher. And he said, hey, these are some of the podcasts that I like. And among those were John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneurs on Fire, Tim Ferriss. What's his podcast called? The Tim Ferriss Show. Yeah,
Tim
that's
Ferriss
it.
Show. Yep.
And then Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income. So those were the first three podcasts that I started listening to.
That's a solid group right there, bro.
I got to tell you, I was like, this stuff is free. I can listen to this and learn. And these people are just pouring into me on a daily basis. JLD, he was daily. And I couldn't believe that. And I just fell in love with the format. Started learning a little bit about the format. And then somebody else said, hey, Trace, you should do a podcast. I'm like, okay, enough people are saying this. Maybe I need to listen to them. So I spent a weekend digesting YouTube videos, learning how to do a podcast. And that was the beginning of April 2017. We're in our fourth year. We just did our 200th episode just this week. Actually, tomorrow is going to be our 200th episode.
Nice.
And it's hard to believe that we could get that far from anybody listening to episode number 1. That was by far the worst piece of broadcasting ever done.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are like that. And it's funny, like I one of my current clients, I'm helping them launch their show. They're really in their mind. I call it podcrastinating. Like they're in there, like they're just delaying that initial launch as much as possible because it's not perfect, right? And they're like, but the logo and but the sound and but
right.
The intro, the outro, it doesn't sound like John Lee Dumas yet. Okay, well, John Lee Dumas didn't sound like John Lee Dumas on his first episode either. So we got to get started. We got to get going and fine tune and tweak from there. So that's a big hump that a lot of newer podcasters have to get over. So you got going, episode 1 recorded. Like, what's the initial self-input that you're like, oh, this is maybe not what I expected? What were a few of those first aha moments when you started getting the show going? Was obviously, if you didn't have some of that going, you wouldn't be on episode 200 now. So what was that initial thing that's like, all right, I think this is actually worth my time?
Well, I'll tell you, I really enjoy teaching what I do. I believe that we all have the I don't want to say the right. I'm trying to think of the right word. Our goal should be we share everything we know with people. I think if everybody did that, just imagine how the world would be. Anyway, that's my little soapbox for that. So with this, the podcast gave me a platform to do that. I'm also a very big procedural guy. I love to dissect things and just figure out every single little thing that I can about them, think about them really hard, put a process together, and then I don't have to think about it again. I just do a checklist. So I did that with the podcast. Now, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I know a lot more 4 years than I did 4 years ago. But I had a process that I started And I also knew that the podcast was going to be a labor of love, and I wasn't going to make a lot of money on that, if any at first. And I didn't make any at first. So I released 3 episodes all up at once.
Mm-hmm.
And that allowed me to at least get some shows in the bank and hopefully get some listeners. Hey, this is actually something I can get involved with. This is something that's exciting. So now I have this habit. I need to wait till the next show comes out next week. Something I didn't realize, and I learned this at a podcast movement convention, that I needed more episodes to create the actual habit of the listeners listening. So I had some people that were listening to the show, but not that many. And I was doing a monthly episode, and a monthly it worked great for my schedule, but people are like, oh yeah, forgot about that. I did listen to that next month. So I started doing every 2 weeks. And then I started doing weekly. And it was really interesting to see our numbers almost double when we went from every 2 weeks to weekly. And all we did was just change the frequency. People got in the habit.
Yep.
So it was all those procedures that really allowed me to get started. And you mentioned this just a second ago, trying to be great, trying to be 100% perfect. There's so many people out there that have asked me, how do you start a podcast? And they said, oh, I'm going to go do this thing. And they never did it because it was never perfect. Well, guys, guess what? 200 episodes into it, I'm far from perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but it's fun. Do it for the fun. Do it for the people that are on the other side of the microphone that you're just not understanding how much your voice is helping them.
Yeah. And it's a constant evolution. We're always learning. Like, I'm 600 episodes deep from my 3 shows. And it's just like, I feel like just now I'm starting to hit my stride where I'm like, all right, I feel like I'm really in a groove now as an interviewer, as a content producer, as somebody that puts good info out there and brings good people into my space to teach my audience. So it's a constant evolution. Now, some people are probably curious, what the heck is Scaling Up H2O? So what is your show about, and who's the ideal listener avatar that you're really trying to serve?
So I am an industrial water treater. What the heck does that mean? So my company is Blackmore Enterprises. We're located in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm also involved with a trade association called the Association of Water Technologies. And what the Association of Water Technologies allowed me to do was create a platform that I could teach what I do to other water treaters. That's where I discovered I had a love of teaching what it is that I do. The podcast now allows me to do that on a weekly basis. So if you are an industrial water treater, which basically means you're treating water that most likely we're not going to drink, water that's used for some sort of process. We've got a lot of breweries, dairies, bakeries, things like that. We're making sure that the water does not hurt the equipment that it's in, and it can be utilized for a very long time so we don't have to flush it down and refill it. So I know that sounds so appealing. Why isn't everybody doing this, right? But that's what I do. My dad taught me the job, and I really do just love it. And I enjoy being able to take what my dad instilled in me and how I treat it as a craft. I respect it. I try to train forward so the other people respect it as well. And being able to do that, not just with the Association of Water Technologies, but now on a weekly podcast. We've got about 12,000 listeners. We're in 86 countries, which again, you look at JLD numbers and you're thinking, okay, well, that's nothing. But I got to say, I mean, when you think of if all those people came together to come listen to you speak, I mean, that's a pretty big stadium. And the feedback that I have received from some of the listeners, that they've gotten certifications because they've heard the encouragement on the show, or they've gotten a new piece of business because they did try to do something that I suggested, or they solved this huge problem they couldn't solve because of something they learned on the show. That's just huge.
Yeah, breakthroughs. And like, let me kind of get up my highlighter and highlight the fact, 12,000 listeners for it's a show about water treatment for water treatment professionals. So for those of you that are afraid to niche down from like the everything about everything show into, something in the entrepreneurial space, or something that's a little bit more in line with a product or program or service that you provide, like, go for it. This is a great example. Trace has a great show with a great following, and it is like super niche down? And like, if you could go maybe one more level to left-handed water treatment professionals or something like that, or, water treatment professionals with green eyes, or I don't know. That's the only other way you get more niche down, I feel like, on this, Trace.
Well, I will tell you, I've always had a rule that anything I've used in business that to become a successful water treatment professional, that's what I'll put on the show. So because of that, I do a lot of business topics, and we've had people, Mark C. Winter, who wrote Rocket Fuel and the Traction book series, the EOS series. And we've had some really good business authors come on because I've been able to utilize them in my business. And because of that, we've picked up a lot of other non-water treaters as listeners.
That's awesome. And it's expanding your reach is always a good thing in the podcasting space. Now, do you have any specific like monetization based goals? A lot of people, ask questions when they get started, like, okay, am I looking for sponsors? Am I looking for selling a product or a program? Am I doing some mentorship? Am I doing some coaching? Any strategies around monetization with your show specifically?
Yeah. So when I first started, my goal was to put as much out there as I could. I eventually would come up with a product. I didn't know what that was going to be, but my job was to just over service the listener of the podcast. I did that with, posts that we did, blogging, tools on the website, and then, of course, the podcast itself.
Yeah.
As we started moving into it, I had several of the people that sell to our company contact us and say how much they've heard their customers are listening to the podcast. That's and awesome. They wanted to be a part of that podcast.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, if I do sponsorships, that's going to cheapen it. And then they're going to think that Trace Blackmore sold out. And I had a really big issue with that. So I sought the counsel of a lot of my friends, and they're like, that's all great, but no margin, no mission. I mean, if you've got some money coming into this thing, you can really blow this thing up.
True.
So it made me think about that. And I actually put that out to my listeners. I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And overwhelmingly, people responded back to me is do it. So my first monetization of it is I will sell a pre-roll ad space at the beginning of the episode to one of our vendors. And now they have pretty much a captive audience, 12,000 water treaters driving around. They're just inside their car, and now they get to bring their product into their car to talk about. Now, my rules on that is I really feel that the audience trusts me, and I never want to violate that trust. So I never want them to think, okay, he's getting a paycheck, he's not really behind this product. And I can't use every product. So my rules are, if it's a product that I've used, definitely come on the show. If it's a product that I haven't used, but I can see the value where it's going to bring something to one of the listeners, that's okay as well. If it doesn't fit one of those two categories, it doesn't come on the show.
That's important to have those kind of standards too. And I like the fact that you're thinking about the people that are engaging with your brand first. Like, okay, how are they going to take this? Let's ask them how they're going to take this. Let's get the permission, like make them really a part of the process. I think that's brilliant. I think more of us need to do that. I know when I've been doing some like course creation or new coaching program creation, I'll blast out a survey to my email list and be like, help me create this. Help me create the thing that you want specifically. And they're kind of along for the ride. And that really levels up engagement, but also like the conversion rate once that's live and ready to go. So that's something that pulling your people along for the ride inside your brand journey, that's a big deal, especially inside of a tight niche like you've got going. So with the advertising space, another question I get a lot, and something I love to see what podcasters are doing, are what pricing model are you using? How did you come up with what they get and how much you're going to charge them?
I think that's always, how do you know if you got the right answer or not? So what I landed on, I looked at all the print ads because that was the only thing that was available. And I called the people that said they wanted to advertise. And I said, well, what's a good value for you? And we kind of talked that through, and I made it so it was relatively equal to what they were already paying and all what they already had in their budget for the print ads. But now we're adding some more things to it. We're adding the fact that we get played multiple times because people want to learn more of the technical interviews that we have. So they might listen to them 2 or 3 times. Well, that's 2 or 3 times that ad gets listened to. We also have a lot of people that will share the podcast. Hey, I just heard this. You were telling me about this issue. Listen to this episode. Now they get to listen to that episode, that ad. We also post on social media that they're a sponsor. We let them know that we let our listeners know that the sponsors are allowing us to do this show. So please show them some support. And we put them on our website as well, prominently for when they have their sponsorship. And then they're listed in our show notes as well. So those are some extra things that they don't get for the same price of what they're paying for an ad.
Nice. I think those bonuses that you can wrap into a sponsorship package, those are huge. Like with my show, Low Carb Hustle, we have sponsors, and it's not just the pre-roll or the mid-roll. It's, well, I'll do a customized Instagram reel. They're getting a shout out in our newsletter. We can do an Instagram live with them, or I do little video clips like what we're doing here of us talking about that. And that's all shareable, just social proof. And they love that. And that allows us to charge a little bit more. And you mentioned John Lee Dumas. He's famous for the cost per mil, the CPM, and it's like $18 per 1,000 downloads. And it's like most podcasters aren't even doing 1,000 downloads. So like, I can charge $2 for this ad or whatever. And it's like, what's the point? But if you can really bring value to somebody and say, not only do you get this, but it's to a target audience. Like you said, these water treaters are in their car listening to this captive audience style, and it's exactly who they want to be talking to and selling to. And depending on what they're selling, maybe every conversion is $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever. Like that's worth it to them to toss you some money to get in front of those people. So I feel like that's really important.
Absolutely. So you brought up John Lee Dumas going back to the niche question. So a friend of ours, Aaron Walker, introduced me to John. And John was asking me about my podcast, and I was telling him about it. And he was fascinated that I was so niche down. And I asked him, I said, well, was that a mistake? I mean, you're a business podcast. Everybody can listen to you. And I thought I made a mistake. He really encouraged me. He said, no, double down on this. This is where you need to go. This is where the future of podcasting is. I don't know how many millions of podcasts there are out there, and people are going to start looking for what is it that I need? I need to go into that lane, and that's where I'm going to pick my podcast from. So that was the advice he gave me.
Exactly. And like a great example, I'll give you 2 great examples of when I get curious about things now, that's what I do. I start searching podcasts. So I've really been interested in cryptocurrency. So I'm like, all right, let's search some Bitcoin shows. Let's search some. And I found a few that I'm like,
it's on sale right now.
Yes. Bitcoin is on sale. Buy the dip. And then HODL, I'm learning all the terms. And then the other one is like Greenville, South Carolina. My wife and I are like taking vacations there and things like that. So I'm looking like who's that realtor or that expert that has that show, the Greenville, South Carolina experience or whatever. And like who is, and nobody has that. So I'm like, this is an opportunity here for somebody to be that expert in that space. And that's what you've jumped all over. I'm curious as to like what you feel like is going really well with your show so far. Like, what do you feel like there are different categories like show growth, audience engagement, monetization, social media interaction, anything like that, or maybe just having a hell of a good time. That's also something that we like to promote. But like, what do you feel like is going maybe even better than expected?
I would say everything that you mentioned, we've got some checks in each one of those categories. The thing that happened that I would say when I started the show, maybe I thought about, but I don't know if I thought about it too much, is community engagement. So I call listeners to the show the Scaling Up Nation. And our job as an industrial water treater, it's pretty lonely. We're driving from account to account. We now get to that account. We see the customer. We finish up with the customer. We're now driving someplace else. So many people have come up to me at trade shows, at expos, things like that. And they've said, you've been, they don't say it like this, but they said, you've been my passenger roadside friend. It's not boring anymore. I feel like I know you. And people ask me questions like they do know me. And I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting. I love it when people come up and say, on episode 117, what did you mean by that? You got to give me a little bit more than that. But people feel like they're not an island. And it's not just with me. People are reaching out to other people in the Scaling Up Nation and having conversations. Now, the thing about the industrial water treater is we are kind of islands, and we kind of don't trust the other person that's doing the same thing that we're doing because they could take our business away from us. But they also have information that can help make our lives easier and vice versa.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing so many stories where people are putting their differences down. Okay, we are doing the same thing. Yes, we are competitors, but we don't have to be competitive with each other. We can make each other better. So a rising tide raises all boats.
Nice. And that's such a cool thing when you feel like not only are you getting to engage with your community, but they're starting to work together and form, some bonds and some partnerships and maybe some collaboration that, like you said, helps everybody level up. And that's amazing. It's a little bit easier for me in the podcasting space. I do my monthly Pod Pals Zoom party. I get all my Pod Pals together. We do interview swaps and all this. And it's very, very positive, very collaborative. And it's a great engagement builder for me. But that's even like more kudos to you, because like you're bringing competitors together and people that are used to kind of fighting it out for business. I feel like that's a great sign that your brand with the show is really dialed in, and that it's like that hub, it's the location, like you said, people plug in on a regular basis, and it's breaking down some barriers. So that is a sign that things are going really well. Now, on the other side of that, I feel like it's really important with this type of show with so many newer podcasters listening in. What has not gone as expected, or what is a mess up, or something that you're like, we all have that story of that interview that the audio got deleted or something like that. Like, what are some of the times you're like, oh, that didn't go so well?
I don't think I have any huge crashes. We used a couple of different services to do our recordings. And there was one service we used that if you closed out before you closed the session, you just lost the interview. And I told the guest, I said, well, thanks for coming on. He goes, yeah, no problem. And he closes his computer. Well, that was gone. And now I've learned, hey, we're going to do a little bit of brief before we start the interview. And when I say goodbye, it is a fake goodbye. Please do not turn your computer off. And that was just gone. We've had, I've always had a stockpile. So if we've, on a weekly show, we'll have minimum 3 or 4 in the bank, just so if something does come up, I'm not worried about, I'm not going to hit a deadline. And that's just my personality. I'm telling you, I'm going to have a new episode on Friday. And I feel like I'm letting you down personally if I don't have that episode on Friday. So far that's never happened, and I'm knocking on something, but we try to prepare for that. We had some things release early. We had a show release that was out of sync. So maybe like episode 23 released before episode 22. And not the worst thing in the world. We've had some issues with some of the services not getting the RSS update. So people are like, hey, I haven't gotten a new episode in 2 weeks. What's going on? And then I don't remember the service, but say it was... I'm trying to name one. So let's say Stitcher, since we were talking about them. For some reason, we had to go in and reset that feed.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you know about that stuff until it actually happens?
Yeah. I've had that happen too. And it's strange. I had that happen on Stitcher, and it had it happen on Spotify. And people are like, why aren't you on any Android stuff? I'm like, I should be. And I'd done some rebranding, or I switched my show image or something, and then it stopped the feed. It just caused a little tripwire or something. So yeah. That's when your audience is really looking out for you. When you're like, hey, something's messed up. And normally it's this is good, and it's not happening anymore. So that's another sign that your brand is is pretty dialed in with your audience.
People are actually listening. They're missing it.
Yes. And it wasn't my mom. So that's good. Like somebody else.
Right. Something that I wouldn't say we're struggling with, but we don't know what the right answer is how do we scale? And we're always looking for new information on that. So we're looking at other organization trade shows that have a touch into our industry, and we're thinking, okay, how do we support them? How do we promote what they are doing? And then in turn, just organically, that's going to bring some listeners to us. So we're trying to do some things like that. I'm not a social media guy by any stretch. I've got some people that help me out that are. So I'm trying to listen to them and do more things with social media. My brain just doesn't go there. So we're just trying to figure out, how do we find the next scaling up H2O listener? And that's just the question that we always talk about.
Okay, I'll give you a couple quick ideas, because this is my jam. Like podcast marketing, that's, podcast growth. Shout out to everybody that's in my Download Growth Club. Like that's what I'm very passionate about, because I see so many podcasters quit because nobody's listening. So I'm like, well, let's get you up over those first few barriers of, like, if we can get somebody to 125 downloads per episode, they're in the top 50% of all podcasts. If we can get
is that the right statistic for that?
Yes, 125 downloads, and after 30 days of a release is 50%, top 50 percentile. If you can go to 1,000, you're top 20 percentile. So run those numbers. So that gives people hope. Like that look and that little twinkle in your eye that just happened, Trace. I'm like, I want to explain that to people, and now I want to get them there, because there's a lot of people out there hanging around 15 or 20 downloads per episode, and they're like, I don't know why. I'm releasing content. I do the social media posts, but nothing's happening. So I'm like, all right, let's look at some low-hanging fruit. Let's look at some opportunities. One that I think you could score big with is what I call a podcast promo intro swap. I'd be glad to do this with you. I'm not the best.
That's a lot of alliteration there.
Well, okay, so I'm not the best partner for you in this, but I'm good for practice. Yeah, I'll give you my script and I'll show you exactly how to do it. We'll do it. And then you can take this, and ideally you want to look for somebody, like you said, those tangential relationships where maybe they're a great guest for your show. Maybe they've been on your show before. That's cool too. But what we would do is I would record a quick intro for your show, but I get to give my show a little mini plug within that intro. You do the same for me. And we have this agreement, I play yours, you play mine. And it's just like, hey, Scaling Up H2O fans, it's your buddy Adam from Podcasting Business School. It's the show where I teach podcasters how to love their show like a hobby, but build it like a business. You are listening to the Scaling Up H2O podcast with my good friend, Trace Blackmore. Let's start the show. I would do that for you. You would follow that script, do it back for me. I play at the beginning of one of my episodes. You play at the beginning of one of your episodes. It's a cool pattern disrupt. So people are used to hearing a certain thing and they skip through it at the beginning of your show. This will get them to pump their brakes and go, ooh, different voice, different thing. What's happening? I'm going to listen. And the same thing for you. And it pulls people into your world. I had one of my coaching clients. I said, all right, I want you to do 10 of these. This month, I want you to get 10 of these out there. She did it and she doubled her downloads. And she sent me like this text message, like, what's going wrong? I'm like, I don't like that text message. And then she screenshotted. I was like, all the podcast promo swaps, they're paying off. So think back to anybody that you've interviewed on your show that's in your space or is tangential to your space. I would hit them up for a promo swap. And it's just like a little ad, a little reminder. Hey, I've got a podcast that you may want to listen to also, or just look for people at trade shows or other just relationships that you have. And it works like a charm, and it's super easy. It's 20, 30 seconds of your time. And so that's something I would definitely look at for sure. I'll kick you my little mini script that I use that works pretty well on that too. That. Yeah. Then the other thing, if you don't like social media, I look at a pie chart.
I'm just not good at it. I've had people that work with me that are great at it. I'm just not.
Yeah. So when we look at podcast marketing, I look at like a pie chart, and we have 3 growth zones. We have OPP, other people's podcasts, being on their shows, doing podcast promo swaps, leveraging other people's shows. The other one is social media and like structured social media. And the third zone is paid marketing options. So if social media, if we're not effective there, if we're not really into it, we can kind of slim up that part of the pie chart and expand other people's podcasts and paid marketing. So most of the time people think paid marketing in the podcasting space, they're like, I got to buy Facebook and Instagram ads. That's okay, but I'm not going there. I love podcast player ads. And most podcasters have never heard about this. They don't know what the heck it is, and they have no idea how to do it. And it's not that hard. You just got to know a few basics. So podcast players, like, wherever people listen to podcasts, where do you listen to shows? You listen on Apple, Spotify? Where do you listen to your podcast?
I think most of my stuff's on Google.
Okay. So like Google, Stitcher, there's a platform called Overcast. Apple will not let you do ads. They have 60% of the downloads in the world, but the other 40% are open territory for this method. So let's say somebody is listening on Overcast. That's a very popular app for non-iPhone users, and they're listening to a business show. You can run an ad, a banner ad across the top for your show. And if they click on it, they'll track that and they'll send you that feedback. But if they hit subscribe, they will also track that and tell you exactly how many new subscribers, not downloads, but subscribers that you got for your show off your ad. So you could spend $200, get 70 new subscribers that are binge listening on your 200 episodes, which produces hundreds, if not thousands of downloads, and they're ideal listeners. And you're advertising on podcasts in your niche category, which is like awesome. So this is my jam. I'm always running ads on different players. Spotify is another one. You can even do zip codes on Spotify, but it's an audio ad. So it's a little bit different. Each player has its own unique nuances, and I kind of nerd out over it. And the advantage I have is I have these charts every morning at 5 a.m. I go and I check the prices for each podcast player because they change daily based on demand. So if you run a business ad on Overcast, you might pay $2,000, you may pay $500. I know the difference of what's a good price and what's not because I check it every day and I chart it every day. So when people come in like, okay, Adam, what's a good price for the education category in Overcast? I'm like, I would wait till it's at 200, not at 1,200, because you're going to save yourself $1,000 and get the same amount of exposure. So little things like that, but
fantastic.
I would, and if you've got $500 to put in, I would do some Spotify, I would do some Overcast, a few other places, and I'll mention those off air because I've ruined the Overcast pricing a little bit because I started teaching people how to use it, and it's demand based, and the pricing tripled after I did that full breakdown on an episode. I was like, oh, that was not smart for me, but I served my audience, and now they've got that resource. Spotify isn't demand based, so I talk about them a lot. There's a few other little fishing holes I go into that I'll share with you off air. But it's awesome, and you get subscribers, and now your job is like, all right, the horse has been led to water. Now I got to keep it drinking and produce great content, which you do, and you've proven with your audience, and you're interacting with them. So I think a little bit of exploring podcast promo intro swaps, a little bit of paid ads on some podcast players. That's where you're going to level up, and it can be within your niche still. And I think that, I think it'd be worth your time at least exploring with that. So again, we can talk about that off air a little bit too. But any ideas popping up or any questions off of what I just told you there?
I've got a lot of ideas, and I'm going to try some things because I haven't even thought in that area. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, those are two of my favorite zones. Like I said, I like to nerd out. And it looks like we're getting some good feedback on Facebook. Good stuff as always. It's mainly because of Trace. Trace is a great guest. So thank you for the feedback on Facebook. Don't forget to leave a comment if you guys want to chime in. So I can't let you go without talking about some tips for brand new podcasters. They've been podcrastinating. They're like, oh, I really want to launch a show. I want to be like Trace and Adam with 100 plus, 200 plus episodes. But, what would you say to that person, Trace, that's kind of spinning their wheels and they're like, I know I need to get started. I want to get started. I just haven't gotten started yet. What are some beginner tips that you would give to them to help them out?
I would say pick a date that you're going to release on, and that is the date, and work backwards from that. I would say that don't just have one episode go out that day, have 3 episodes go out, and then maybe even have another couple of episodes recorded. So now you've got some episodes in the bank. But when somebody just listens to one episode and they like it and they've got to wait an entire week for the next one, they're not going to remember it. But if they listen to 3 of them on the first day, man, when is Adam going to come out with episode number 4? And if you already got it in the bank, you're now working on episode 5, 6, 7, and you're taking some pressure off of you. You mentioned it before, the trying to be perfect, you're never going to get there. And people really don't like perfect. If you sound too polished, I've listened to some podcasts that I just don't believe in. I don't think they're genuine because they do sound too polished.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're not doing this. This is so edited. It's crazy. There's an endearing quality when people mess up. Hey, they're just like me. They just happen to have a microphone, and they're giving me all this information.
That's what I'm hoping for, Trace. I'm like, I do it in the name of authenticity. Every time I screw up people, that's what I'm saying.
That's right. That's right. I try to prove that about 20 times a show. But with those things, just get out of your own way, do it, and wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of times being ahead of the game on the episode bank. That's huge. Like, I feel like we don't want to be that podcaster that we release on Fridays. It's Thursday night. Got to find somebody to interview to get a show out tomorrow.
Right.
You don't want to be that. Don't put yourself in that position. Have those banked out episodes. Trace, what do you like as far as the buffer zone? Do you like being a couple of weeks out? Because there's you got to walk that fine line of, you don't want to interview somebody and their interview comes out 12 years later. Right. So what's that buffer zone look like for you?
So I'm juggling a lot of things in addition to the podcast. So my minimum where I feel good is if we have 4 episodes that are ready to go. That gives me a month. So if something breaks loose, I can work on that. I don't have to worry about not making my commitment to my audience. When I record somebody, I'm about 3 months out. And I tell them, I said, your episode's going to air. And I keep a schedule. We have our entire year lined out. And I will tell them exactly where they'll fit in. So there's no surprises. Hey, you're going to go out on August 17th. And they say, oh, okay. Something I also do is I send a thank you card. Hey, thanks for being on the show. Nice. And that's just something I've always done. And so many people do you know this is like the first thank you card I've ever received? Or that's just beyond me. But just little things like that. We wouldn't have a show without our guests.
Yeah, that's true. We got to take care of them. And I love that personalization, man. That's awesome. Now, do you handwrite it, or is it like a typed out thank you card, or what's
I don't think it counts if you type it out. You got to handwrite it.
Oh man. Now you're challenging me because I have the handwriting of I could have my 6-year-old daughter do it and it'd probably look a lot better. So.
But that's part of the point. I mean, people say, hey, Adam really wrote this. I can't read it, but I know he wrote it and it means something to me.
I was doing a book launch, back with my first show. And I got this great idea that I'm going to send you books and I'm going to handwrite a message in the inside of the book so that it's from me. And I just had a whole bunch of people making fun of my handwriting. Like, I appreciate it, but did your kid write this with a crayon like this? Because wow. And then somebody from Australia wanted one, and I had to send it, and it was like $40 to send them my own book. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. that was a mistake. But yeah, we live and we learn. Yeah, I'm a 2 to 4 week buffer kind of a guy with my shows. I got 3 shows, so I've got to really kind of gauge it out. So I have different strategies. With Low Carb Hustle, I have 2 co-hosts also. So we meet up once per month, knock out 5 episodes for the next 5 weeks, and then we're within that month buffer. With this show, I'm within 2 to 3 weeks usually. Like, your episode will be out in 2 Mondays, by the way. And with Podcasting Business School, I like being 3 to 4 weeks ahead on that one, just because it's a little bit more robust. It's a little bit more involved, and there's a little more bells and whistles with that one. So, but yeah, that's if a pandemic happens, you get hurt, if you go on vacation for a couple of weeks, having that buffer, it will serve you very, very well. That is a very wise tip for the beginners. All right, Trace, I've got your website scrolling across the bottom of the screen for those that are watching on YouTube or Facebook, scalinguph2o.com. Where can people find you on social media? You said you don't like social media, but are you hanging out anywhere in particular, or what's the best way to reach out?
I'm not good at social media. So Trace Blackmore on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Those are probably the big 3. And and then of course, anywhere podcasts are found, Scaling Up H2O.
Let's say somebody's listening and they want to book you on their show to talk. Where do they go? scalinguph2o.com and hit the contact button, or what's the best procedure there?
That would be the best way. There's that will take you straight to. Yep. We try to make that easy.
All right, Trace, I really appreciate you taking time. I feel so honored to be able to do what I do on a daily basis. I get to talk to podcasters. I get to learn from podcasters. I get to learn from people like you that are in the trenches, growing their brand. They're curious about this world of podcasting like I am. So I appreciate you so much for spending some time with us here today. I can't wait to see what you do next. And we'll talk, like I said, we'll talk offline about a couple of these marketing things that I think we could implement and really blast your brand up there. So I appreciate you very much, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show.
All right, Pod Pals. I'm sure that we sparked a few ideas for you here today about branding, niching down marketing. If you are enjoying the show, of course, hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Share it out to another Pod Pal that may benefit. And as always, I will send you off wishing you health, happiness, and many downloads. I will see you on the next episode.